Cross-sector collaboration, co-creation, co-design, and similar phrases are pretty often to hear nowadays. But too often they're just buzzwords rather than genuinely driving transformative change. How do you effectively bring institutions together with activists, movements, and communities in order to tackle the structural inequalities at the heart of our societies and redesign democracies to truly work for everyone? Now, these are pretty big questions, but I'm really lucky to have Panthea Lee with me today, who has been asking and answering these questions for the last 15 years. With a background as an ethnographer, organizer, facilitator, and designer, Panthea is a pioneer in designing and guiding multi-stakeholder processes to tackle the most pressing challenges of our time. And this includes everything from launching efforts to protect human rights defenders, to advancing the promise of participatory democracy, and decolonizing the production and consumption of knowledge. Panthea does all of this as the co-founder and executive director of social enterprise Reboot, which works with partners from the UN Women to the World Bank in places from New York City to Nigeria and Mexico. And Panthea is also an advisor to several participatory democracy efforts and progressive multi-stakeholder initiatives. So Panthea, it is a pleasure to have you here with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Really, so I wanted to get started by asking you a little bit about the space you're working in. So we tend to think of work either within sectors or in particular profession tags, but you work at the intersection of everything with a very diverse skill set. So how would you describe what you do and what motivates you?
Yeah, so I think part of the challenge of why we are stuck in so many of the problems that we are trying to solve is that we think in terms of sectors or professional tags or whatnot. You know, I work in government, or I am an activist, or I work in the private sector. And I think we recognize that so many of the problems facing our world today really require cross-disciplinary, multidisciplinary perspectives. And we say that without really grappling with what that means. We come from very different trainings, backgrounds, politics, worldviews. And I feel like so often we don't really understand each other. And so we get together to try and solve problems, and then everyone gets very frustrated with one another when things don't go according to plan. And so I think my career has meandered and had a few sort of twists and turns, but I would say that what I'm really focused on at this moment is helping actors who don't understand each other, who may not even like each other, sometimes that hate each other, come to the table and see each other as humans first. I then, really recognize each other's shared humanity, recognize our shared values and the things that we want to accomplish together, and helping them solve problems. So that's the stage that I'm in now. And a lot of that sort of blends ethnography, understanding where people are coming from, who they are, what has made them who they are and why they work, and facilitation and organizing, because bringing people to the table together can be incredibly tough. So yeah.
And it's super inspiring what you're doing. And as you said, sort of your approach really blends different approaches. I know that you've referred to Reboot as methodologically agnostic, which I really like as a phrase. And I wondered, sort of above and beyond then specific profession skill sets, what you think are the most important skills or qualities that people looking to push through the kind of change that you want to do should bring to the table?
I think having an ability to really listen is so underrated. I think knowing the right questions to ask and asking questions without a particular agenda, and then being really able to listen to the responses is really, really important. I think so often I was just on a call where someone is trying to solve a really thorny issue around the climate crisis. And so, you know, their sort of interview and their set of questions is all just around sort of climate, policy. But people don't necessarily understand things in that way. And I think what happens when we ask questions just from our own point of view and what is the solution, we get sort of really locked into our way of seeing things. We dig our heels in to what we believe the right answer is, and we stop listening to other people and other perspectives. And I think that we are living in a media age where we are incentivized to talk at one another rather than sort of really hear one another. We are living in an age of really polarized media where the business incentives are to make us see things as binary, you know, black or white, is it this or that? And I think that we are really sort of losing our ability to understand nuance, to understand complexity, to sit with the fact that we all bring a multitude of perspectives, and to really sort of sit with the complexity of things to be able to find ways forward. So I find that to be an incredibly important skill.
Definitely. Empathy in its broadest sense. And what I wanted to just give you the opportunity to do, if you're interested, I know you've got involved as both an advisor to several initiatives, and also you're working on countless projects at one go. Are there any that you're particularly inspired by at the moment that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah. I think one that we're working on at the moment with a major US city is, so, you know, right now we are in discussions about what I think there's so many conversations around what an equitable, a fair post-COVID recovery looks like. And then also after the murder of George Floyd, and I'm based in Brooklyn in the US, there are lots of conversations emerging, and rightfully, about racial justice, around racial equity, and then sort of expanding out to sort of different social justice issues that we've long been working on. And so what I'm seeing is that the world is in a moment of righteous and rightful upheaval. And we've been looking for opportunities because, you know, there's been writers and artists talking about, you know, the pandemic as a portal and how do we seize this opportunity? And there's so many task forces and working groups and commissions being formed. And so right now we are working with the major US city on understanding what a real equity-centered, courageous recovery looks like from the current moment of tumult that we are in. And how we're trying to do that is to say, hey, professional change makers, you don't have the answers. So stop with whatever you're trying to do with your working group. And we have to center the voices of communities that have been long oppressed, that have been systematically marginalized, to really center their voices and visions in what the future world looks like. And then we line up behind that. So happy to talk through some of the mechanisms that we're using there, if that's helpful.
Yeah, that would be incredibly interesting.
Yeah, so what we're doing is, you know, right now, the way that I've seen a lot of civic engagement is we are inviting communities in that have been long suffering for a variety of reasons. We ask them to either, on the one hand, to maybe fill out a survey that doesn't really capture the richness of the experience, or we ask them to come on stage to perform their trauma for institutional attention and resources. And neither respects the dignity of who they are, of what their life experience has been. And so we are working to engage communities in expressing what their wishes for the future are, you know, and then working with artists to put that around the city, you know, in murals, in quotes, and to feature the portraits and the aspirations and the dreams of long oppressed communities, to say, this is what the future should look like, this is what we want. And then it's up to professional change makers, whether it's researchers, to come up and figure out what the challenges to that are. What are the problems that we see, rather than starting from the perspective of this is the policy solution. We're in discussions to convene a citizens assembly to then debate some of the thorny values-based issues that are inevitably going to emerge, to be able to propose to government what the solutions should look like. And we are negotiating, I don't know if this will happen, but in terms of how resources should be allocated, we're then saying, let's let citizens decide. Let's run this through a participatory budgeting exercise. So from conceiving of the vision and the North Star, to debating what the solutions should be, to deciding what resources we allocated, it is all citizen-driven, people-powered, people-led, and we as professionals are really sort of lining up behind that vision. And I think in that way, the role of government is really to implement the will of the people, rather than traditionally the way it has been done is top-down and broken, and government sort of sets the agenda, and then the rest of us, activists, community groups, whatnot, are left sort of protesting on the edges, fighting for crumbs. And so we're really trying to invert that model.
And I think that whole idea of seeing government in this new role and empowering citizens is something that a lot of people, no matter what country they're in around the world, are very interested in doing. I would be interested in asking, what challenges have you come up against in the work that you're doing in that space? And if there's someone in another country who maybe has no idea where to start on getting started on facilitating those kinds of change-making projects, what advice might you give to them?
Yeah. So I think the biggest challenges that I see in this work is for institutions and for governments to give up control. Because right now, what I think the sort of biggest point of negotiation is, what resources are we going to put behind community visions? And then, government stakeholders rightly ask me, well, but what are the visions going to be? I'm like, well, I don't know. They're like, well, but we can't commit resources to things that we don't know. And I was like, I get you, because, that's not the way that, your partnerships frameworks work, that way your procurement works, the way that, kind of your funding mechanisms work. But at the same time, I think this is the problem. So if we really right now believe in sort of overturning systems and really, taking a wholesale look at what we've been doing wrong, part of it is, I don't buy that we can't reimagine our partnership frameworks. We're talking about reimagining the world right now, and you're telling me that the legislative and bureaucratic hurdles, which are real and I deal with them, can't be overturned. I don't really buy that, So then I think that it becomes a question about, how much do we really want this? How much do we really say we value community voices? Because the administrative things can get resolved. So I think the real power here, I think the real issue here, the real question that we are contending with, that we can use excuses of sort of, administrative whatnot, is we're asking people in positions of power to give up power. We're asking you to say, if you believe in your communities, put resources behind those visions, not just say, yes, you'll come in for some consultations, we'll then think about what to do about it afterwards. Give resources, because frankly, I think for a lot of communities, we are sick and tired of explaining again and again and again what the problems are, and frankly, defending why it is that we have a right to exist, to be healthy, to thrive, to feel joy, and then trying to fit these requests into, contort ourselves into your institutional frameworks and your policy frameworks and your priorities. I think there are intermediary roles that need to be played, but I think a lot of this is about where and how do we give up power. And so for folks that are new to this work, I think what I keep coming back to is, I think we so often see each other in boxes, When I'm in activist and movement spaces, we're like, oh, the government, we couldn't possibly talk to the government, and so we're just going to yell at them and throw rocks at them in the media and, kind of launch these campaigns. And then when I'm in institutional and public sector spaces, we're like, oh man, like the activists. And frankly, I feel like we are getting played by our media systems that tell us to yell at each other, that tell us there's no common ground. And I would say first, how do we take each other out of these boxes? And I mean, of course, the ethnographer is going to say this, but, you know, see each other really as humans first, and think about how we look beyond our titles, look beyond our affiliations to be able to find common ground.
If only we can get the whole world thinking this way, it will be a beautiful place quite soon.
Robyn, how do we get there?
Well, that actually links on very nicely to a point I definitely wanted to raise with you, because you wrote a beautiful Twitter thread about a week ago. And that's on the point of co-creation, because a lot of people say that they are co-creating the future, or co-creating cities, or co-creating whatever they want nowadays. But I would be interested to know what you think co-creation does, or on the other hand, does not mean.
I think co-creation does not mean throw a bunch of people into a room and magic will happen. I don't think it means let's get some people to give us some ideas and then we'll think about whether or not we want to do them. And I don't think it means, you know, getting everyone to show up and be like, well, great, let's start from zero. Let's start from, you know, what do we think the issues are, and going from there. You know, I am so excited to see the concept of co-creation getting traction, because as I said at the top, I believe we really need to come together from diverse disciplines and perspectives to solve the most pressing and urgent challenges ahead of us. And yet these very lackluster, uninspired, ahistorical ways of doing co-creation are serving nobody. It makes everyone tired and frustrated and just believing that we really cannot work together. And that's just not true. And so I think that to do it well, I mean, I think we need to have, and, you know, based in the US now, but I think, you know, in many places, we are having historical reckonings, you know, around what the injustices have been in the past and what are their present day impacts. How have they been embedded into our institutions, into our governance systems, whatnot. And I think that, you know, I mean, this is dangerous, but I think innovation spaces, and I think co-creation folks tend to come from the design world, or there's a lot of overlap in sort of design world. And I think one of the most dangerous concepts that the design world has promoted is this notion of beginner's mindset. Let's just think blue sky. Let's just, you know, let's just come in and like get creative, and, you know, here's some Play-Doh and here's some Post-its and like go at it. And I think that is hugely insulting to people that have long suffered, that are coming in rightly with a bunch of, I mean, we can refer to it as baggage, or we can just refer to it as like legitimate grievances. And so how do people that are commissioning this, you know, these co-creation exercises or whatnot, really come in with, basically do their own work beforehand to understand what the legitimate grievances are, what the historical, you know, violations of rights been, what has been the violence that communities have endured, and coming in sort of informed by that perspective, because I think an ahistorical lens is not going to get us very far. I think we also have to, is this too much, or should I?
No, not at all, keep going.
Because I could talk about this forever, but you know, I think we also have to call out and really tackle power imbalances. Just because you're bringing in diverse perspectives does not mean everyone is showing up equally. And I think those with less power often feel exhausted coming to have to explain again and again and again what their issues are. And so how do you, in as much as you can, put people on an even playing field? Ethnographic studies have shown that when you know, residents come into city meetings and they perhaps are not able to carry themselves or speak in the language of, you know, our sort of, you know, fancy buzzwords and, you know, the sort of things that we all just like put out in workshops with ease, they're actually more likely to disengage from further civic processes in the future, because they, feel disillusioned, they feel uncomfortable. And so how do we get people to feel comfortable? How do we level the playing field? And that's from things like very basic things, not, grandstanding, not doing sort of titles, not, there's some very practical things, but we have to call out those power imbalances and try to even them out as much as possible. And I think just the final thing I'll say is just money, like invest resources. So often people get disillusioned because we ask them for their opinion, we take a look at it, we consider it, and then we either give a pittance, which is just tokenistic, to say, great, we'll give you, a small amount of money to do some small version of whatever it is that you asked for. And that's just not good enough. It's participatory theater. And I think we really have to do better. I think it is irresponsible to bring people in to a process and say we want their views if we are not actually willing to invest in the visions that come out of it and put real resources behind it. So.
And I'm very much hoping that everybody listening to this will take your advice and do precisely that. And it was very nice when you mentioned the importance of taking a historical lens or looking at the historical perspective when doing these projects, because that leads me very nicely onto what I wanted to talk about next, which is your own personal journey to reaching the place that you're at today. We're very interested in hearing from inspiring creative bureaucrats and their close allies like yourself on what's kind of got them to the point that they're at. And so my question to you would be, I know you grew up in Taiwan and moved to Canada when you were 6, and then have spent the last 12 years in the US, having worked in many countries, I think 30 or so as well. So I was wondering, across that period, what have been the moments that have most inspired you or disillusioned you and led you to the place you're at today?
Thank you for asking. I'm trying to think how to best answer this. I would say this. I think that my family, I think being born in Taiwan and grappling with this is something I've been thinking a lot about lately. So you're perhaps catching me in a reflective moment, but it's something I've been thinking a lot about lately, because I think the country of my sort of birth country, my motherland, has really influenced, I think, how I thought about the work that I do now. My family was quite poor and grew up under martial law in Taiwan. And I think that gave my family a real aversion to politics and to government and to questioning, even though there were so many things at the time that were wrong. And because if you asked too many questions, you got disappeared. Just that was the way it went. Yeah. And so I think it really, and I think I never sort of understood that instinct until in my own family and my own parents till a lot later, because I was always like, well, but why is this? And why is that? And why can't we talk about it? And why are we not, really willing to, and I think I had a lot of own questions about my own family and history that I wanted to understand. So that drove me to journalism. And I spent a lot of time earlier in my career, just as a journalist, working in developing countries, and really asking a lot of questions around, but again, why don't things work? Why are people oppressed this way? Why don't people have basic, don't have water? Why is this woman that I'm interviewing? I remember this one time I was in a tiny village in Nigeria, and I was interviewing a woman after her 4th baby had died of diarrhea. And this was, I don't know, 2008 or something. And I just remember, and I immediately go, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't be here. Please let me, I don't need to do this interview, And she's like, no, it's fine. It's just what happens here. And I think just experiences like that just make you, when you look at sort of where we all live, and we are so incredibly privileged. But because our countries have partaken in atrocious acts against these, other countries. I mean, Nigeria, the history of Nigeria, I think it's like half of don't quote me on the stat, but I think it's like like nearly half of African Americans in the United States can trace their history to, the transatlantic slave trade that came through Nigeria. You think, the extraction of resources there. Nigeria's GDP is going up, and yet the poverty rate is increasing. And I think about all of these, and then we give a pittance in development aid as a way to absolve ourselves of our sins. And so I think that, and then this poor woman whose fourth baby has died of diarrhea. Like, what recourse does she have? And so journalism then drew me to just doing the work and working in development. And I was hugely mistrustful of big institutions at first because of all the reporting that I did. I'm like, man, these guys do more harm than good. But eventually I was like, well, I always feel like you have to work with institutions that you don't understand, that maybe you disagree with, because things are never as simple from the outside. So I joined the UN, and I spent some time working on the types of programs that I had been appalled by as a journalist, and really thinking from a design perspective, how do we actually ensure the voices of this woman and others like her are really integrated into the design processes. This is long-winded, but then that led me to, be frustrated by the often sort of empty rhetoric and hypocrisy of big institutions. I saw a lot of really talented people leave because they also got frustrated. So I ended up starting my own organization where I've just been playing with this question then of big institutions have value. Governments, of course, have value. But people don't understand the constraints that they face. Activists have value. They can push for harder sort of values positions than we can as, bureaucrats on the inside. And so how do we get them to work together? And I think, I've just been exploring those questions ever since.
Well, and it's what's inspiring about the work that you're doing currently, because it's from that place of empathy of these different sectors and professions that you're able to come together and truly understand the frustrations of the different areas, and the fact that actually they're aiming towards similar things, just misunderstanding each other. So yeah, it is incredibly inspiring what you're doing, and I hope that others take heart from it. I think we are out of time. Unfortunately, I could speak with you for hours, honestly. But thank you so much for joining me. And I look forward to at some point, hopefully seeing you in real life.
Yes. Once we are able to. No, this has been really lovely. Thank you so much for having me and for the really thoughtful questions. So thank you.